All right. Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by my good friend and co-host Graham Doran. Graham, we are just 20 days out from Selection Sunday. Somehow, this season has just flown right by. I can't believe it's the end of February, but 3 weeks left, and this week you wanted to look more so at the teams in that seed range that tend to get ignored. Certainly the bubble teams get paid attention to, but it's Monday, so we're talking ACC, so teams like Miami and Clemson and NC State who just get overlooked as they're in. We'll figure out their seed later, but we want to take a good look at them this week. So which ACC team do you want to really get into today as I tweet out this link?
Well, I think NC State and SMU and Clemson really all fit that mold. But the team I'd like to actually first start talking about is Louisville. And the reason why I want to talk about Louisville is I think they're a fantastic basketball team. But I go over that resume and I keep seeing decent wins. I don't see great wins. It's like, okay, you beat Kentucky at home. All right. I would expect most tournament teams to beat Kentucky at home. In fact, based on Kentucky's schedule, I would expect a lot of them to win in Lexington too. So, looking at Louisville, I'm really looking at this upcoming schedule and thinking they need to get at least one win over a tournament team on the road, if not two, to really bolster their seed. I have them right now 25th overall on the 7 line, which I think a lot of people who are really into the metrics would be very surprised by that because everything indicates Louisville should not be a 7 seed. But I think the committee is going to be watching and waiting for a big win. And I think Louisville has some opportunities. They probably need to get it done maybe in Chapel Hill.
Well, it was cute of you to start out on the team not on the list here. You could have told me you wanted to talk about Louisville before we did this. But all the forecasting models say they're a lock. So I have them over here at this range. But yeah, they are, I have them as a low 6 seed. You have them as a high 7. They do fall into this range of teams we want to discuss. I think we can talk about North Carolina a little bit too, as a likely 6 seed at the moment. Um, they happen to be playing each other tonight in Chapel Hill. I think if Louisville does get that win, now you start thinking about maybe a protected seed because, like you said, certainly the predictive metrics love them. And a road win over North Carolina would finally give them that quad 1A win that they've been lacking for forever. 0-6 right now. It's similar to BYU, right? Winning that home game against Iowa State, that was that statement win we needed to see from them. And then all of a sudden they went from like 28 to 21 in my mind. And it feels like they could absolutely play their way up to a 3 or a 4 if they were to finish strong. And I think Louisville is probably in the same boat. And then with North Carolina, we're still trying to figure out what the heck they are without Caleb Wilson and when Caleb Wilson will be back. I know he's been like shooting, but he hasn't been cleared to actually play yet. We're buttressing up against a Bonzi Colson situation here, but they did at least win. They beat Pitt. They won at Syracuse pretty convincingly. They haven't been awful without him by any means. So I still think they're in pretty good shape for a 5 or a 6 seed. What do you think is going to happen in the game tonight?
I think Louisville wins. They need it more
I do
than
too.
UNC. I think they get it.
Not only do they need it more, but there's a lot of history showing that opposing point guards, lead guards, whatever, tend to destroy the Tar Heels. And Michael Brown Jr. is a pretty good opposing lead guard. I think he could put on a show, which he's been doing a lot of lately. But these we're kind of revisiting the what's it going to take wins above bubble thing that I put together. Was that 2 or 3 weeks ago now? Um, so you can see here up in the top of each team, that is what Torvik's Tournicast says their percentage chance of making the tournament is. So, these first 4 teams pretty strongly in. Virginia Tech and Cal very much less so, probably not going to get in. These are their wins above bubble, what Torvik projects a win would get them for each of these remaining games. This right here is what their wins above bubble would be, adding together their current official score and those projections if they get the wins we're projecting, and not we're projecting. As you pointed out, it's crazy to think that SMU might actually win all 4 of those, but Ken Palm does have them as like a 3 or 4 point favorite in each of those games. So we're penciling them in as a W for all of them. I doubt they get there. But for these first four teams, even if they do lose every game left, they're still going to finish with a slightly positive wins above bubble rating. I don't think a mark below one is really going to do much for you this year. Just looking at what, the teams around 40th and wins above bubble are at, what the actual bubble this year is probably a win higher than it has been in years past. So I do think each of them needs to win at least one game down the stretch. And of the bunch, I think maybe Clemson is most likely to not do so, but they would have to really blow that game against Georgia Tech. Which of these four teams do you want to start on? Maybe Miami, since we're the furthest apart on those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I see you have them 29, I have them 32. I don't really feel strongly one way or the other about where they're at there. I think the message is Miami's an 8 seed. I don't feel like they're a 7. I don't feel like they're a 9. I feel like they're an 8 and a solid 8. What could get really interesting is that trip to Tallahassee. Florida State's obviously been playing phenomenal basketball. Florida State beat them in Miami even before Florida State was playing phenomenal basketball. Really dangerous trip for the Canes. It says it's 0.52 wob if they win, but that tells you it's minus 0.48 wob if they lose. That's a lot to lose on a game like that. So
Yeah.
I look at Miami and I think an 8 right now easily could fall into that 9 or 10 range by the time we get to Selection Sunday.
Yeah, I have them at 29 and I don't like it at all. I think we talked about it yesterday. The back end of the 7 line is where you're just, what'd you say? You're looking for stomachable things. I know you were talking more along the bubble at that point, but yeah, just trying to find a 28, 29 worthy resume is tough right now. And I ended up just kind of defaulting to Miami because they have the least bad on their resume. They don't have great wins at all. I mean, they had no wins until they beat North Carolina and NC State in succession like 2 weeks ago. But yeah, I think 8 seed just feels about right for them. And I'm hoping we end up with a Miami first round matchup. I would love that. Give us the Canes and the Red Hawks. Uh, Winner then goes and gets pummeled by Arizona, but they deserve to be a single digit seed, both of them, I think. But yeah, I could have easily landed them at 32 as well because I think I have UCF at 30, Utah State at 31. I'm a bit lower on Kentucky because I'm discounting the St. John's win a little bit because they had Jalen Lowe and Jaden Quaintance then. So I have Kentucky at 32, but any of those teams could be above Miami right now. And if they win, as long as they win the Boston College game, I think they're a lock. Um, if they were to drop all four, it does get shaky in a hurry because, like I said, there's not a whole lot to that resume that, you don't want to end the season on a 5 game losing streak, even if it still would only have them at what 21 and 11 or 21 and 10, something like that. So um, let's go to SMU since you did kind of laugh at the notion of them finishing 4-0. What do you actually think they will do down the stretch?
I look at that schedule and I think 2 and 2. Probably take one of the games in California. Probably take one of the last two. If I had a guess, SMU's been pretty good at home. They're going to beat Miami at home and then win one of the California games. I think they probably lose in Tallahassee. So that's what I'll go with. 2 and 2 finish for the Mustangs.
I think so too. Now, obviously, if they lose the Cal game, things get a little more interesting over here because Cal will almost certainly beat Pitt and Georgia Tech, right? I know that's a road game against the Yellow Jackets, but Cal should win that one. But even if they win out, that gets them to a 1.75. Do you think they would sneak in at that? But we both have them. They're my
Yeah.
fifth team out, your fourth team out. They're very close, but they don't have individual opportunities to improve the resume, but they have, that collection would give them about a 1.5 increase. I think
Yeah,
that probably gets them there.
I agree. 1.75 wob, they're probably in. Maybe in danger if you take a bad loss in your first ACC tournament game. But that wob score is pretty darn impressive, even on a year like this where the wob scores seem to be getting higher. inside the bracket. I will say one thing Cal has going for them in that scenario isn't just a nice WOB score. It goes back to the actual wins they got along the way. And Cal has some nice wins, so they have wins that will really draw the committee's attention in. So I really like Cal getting into the field if they can beat SMU, and then the tricky part, winning at Wake Forest, much tougher game than it sounds.
Yeah, yeah. Demon Deacons aren't as bad as they're looking. To the Cal point, home win over UNC, a neutral win over UCLA, although Tyler Bilodeau was out for that game. Donovan Dent was hurt. I don't know if that'll get discounted if they end up really looking into those teams right along the bubble. Sweep of Stanford and a road win over Miami. Where are their losses? At Syracuse is not great. At Florida State is not great. At Kansas State is not great, but nothing that elevates to, Santa Clara or a TCU type of terrible loss. So I think if they were to win out, they would be 23-8 and relatively clean with what is now 4 quad 1 wins. Yeah, I think that does this trick. 3-1, I don't think so though. They would end up at a sub 1 wob without a truly elite win. Even at Miami, right? We both have them as an 8. That's not quite a Graham Dorn elite win. Miami needs to get up to a 7 for that to count. But yeah, I think they would be leaving something on the bone if they don't go 4-0 down the stretch. One of their losses was at Virginia Tech, which could come into play in a head-to-head. I know it was a 3-point game on the road. We talked about that in the mock committee on Thursday. That's not an instant tiebreaker by any stretch of the imagination. They didn't play a true home and home. There wasn't a sweep, anything like that. But if Virginia Tech goes 2-1 down the stretch, they're finishing just above a wob of 1. Do you think that gets the Hokies in?
It depends on what happens in their first ACC tournament game. That's my feeling there. If they win one in the ACC tournament, I think they're in. What gets interesting for Virginia Tech in particular compared to other teams is two things. One, they would have wins against Virginia at North Carolina or a sweep of Virginia if instead it's at Virginia instead of North
Yeah.
Carolina. And they won at Clemson, and Clemson could potentially be around that bubble. Then you get into the idea that SMU beat them on a half court shot. Miami lost by 1 there, barely lost to Wake on a last second 3 there, lost on a last second 3 to Stanford. Like, the narrative, I think, is actually pretty good for them if they can get there, because we've talked about a lot of other teams recently, like Ohio State and Indiana, and they just can't seem to win games when they're playing good teams. Virginia Tech would actually have not just the wins, they'd also have those games that make you say, I mean, if one or two of those shots go another direction, the profile looks entirely different. So I think narratively, it's a pretty good story. But that first ACC tournament game, I feel like it could be very similar to West Virginia last year. If you win that one, you're in. If you don't, might be trouble.
Yeah, if they win either of these remaining road games, that would be their third quad 1A win. Now, granted, the Clemson one, Clemson's like 38th in net. That could drop to quad 1B, but still, two would be two excellent wins, one very good win, and no particularly awful losses. Again, kind of a clean resume. They do have 10 losses, but what's the worst one? The home game against Florida State, the home game against Stanford, and Stanford was good then. They still had Chisholm Akpara. Corey was like scoring 40 points a game, it seemed. Then you factor in, as good as Florida State has been lately. They just caught both of those teams at the wrong time. I think that could factor into the conversation if they're right there on the bubble. But yeah, I think it's going to be important to have a clean resume this like if you're clean and you have a couple of quality wins, you're instantly ahead of Ohio State, you're ahead of Santa Clara, all those types of teams that have something that isn't stomachable. And the Hokies, I think they do have a good enough resume in that regard. NC State, you have them as your last 6. I have them near the top of the 7 line. I like that they are at 99.9% because they are the last team on my seed list that I'm not quite willing to say is a lock. They're so close, but if they were to lose out, they would be in a little bit of trouble. I don't expect them to, though. I think they'll win the home game against Stanford, and I think they'll win the road game against Notre Dame. But what I think is more interesting is if they win out, how high do you think the Wolfpack can? I don't think they can get to a 4 seed without also then winning the ACC tournament, but they get interesting, right? That would get their WOB to 4.66. They'd be ahead of what North Carolina is right now. Not by a ton, but a little bit ahead.
I wouldn't rule out a 4 seed in that scenario. That Duke win would hop off the page, so would winning at UVA. They already have wins at SMU, at Clemson, and let's not discount, we've talked about how hard it is to go play in Winston-Salem and in Tallahassee. They already won at Wake. They already won at Florida State. So they've done some road damage. If they add to that by winning at Virginia and then they followed up with a marquee win over Duke, we already saw them, even if it was a weekend North Carolina, absolutely run them out of the gym. I think NC State could potentially sneak onto that 4 line in this scenario. And I will say, NC State, it's hard for me to get them to 24. I don't feel like they're a 24 team. I feel like they're closer to like a 28 team, but somebody has to be there. And they're 37th in strength of record right now. I feel bad for NC State in this regard. I have them 24th. I think they're going to drop, even if they just lose at UVA. Like you losing at UVA is not a bad loss, but they're in that kind of like somebody has to be their spot. So even taking a loss that's not a bad loss to UVA will drop them for me. It's just a matter of can they then follow it up with a win against Duke? Because if they don't, NC State might be looking at the 8-9 game.
Yeah, I mean, it is big for them that they're already 11-7 against quads 1 and 2. They do have that terrible home loss to Georgia Tech that draws back a little bit from what they've accomplished. But I mean, I guess the home game against Stanford would be borderline quad 2, quad 3. I assume at Notre Dame, even though they're nowhere close, that's probably quad 2. Notre Dame's 89, yeah, so that's closer to quad 1 than quad 3. So if they were to win out, they'd be around 14-7 against quads 1 and 2. That I mean, North Carolina's 8-6. I think they could get interesting in a hurry. I think it's just I think there's a ceiling. If Virginia is 16 right now and they're already almost 6 wins above bubble, they're already 12-3 against quads 1 and 2. Like I don't know how high they can climb, but you beat Duke. That's an instant seed boost as far as the committee's going to be concerned. Yeah, maybe there's still a path, but I don't think they will do it. Who haven't we touched on? Didn't really mention Clemson beyond just, if they lose out, things would get really ugly. We both have them. I actually scrubbed them from 37 down to 38 after our pod yesterday. You have them at 36. Um, if they were to lose both of these games and then beat Georgia Tech, they'll be at a 1.35, which, man, that feels a little bit above what the cut line is going to be, but they're leaving themselves suspect
So
to
you know how
having the committee really look at their resume and not be that impressed.
that's exactly what I was going to say. Literally exactly what I was going to talk about. They are putting themselves in the position where the committee, what have we talked about this year? Why did we want to do this series? Because the NC States and the SMUs and the Miamis and the Clemsons, we don't talk that much about because they're kind of those middling seeds. They'll figure it out. The committee's the same way when they meet. They don't talk quite as much about the middling seeds as they do the bubble, as they do the top of the bracket, because they focus a lot on the top of the bracket because that's how everything gets built around it. They focus a lot on the bubble because they want to make sure the right teams are in the field. They don't do as much in the middle of the bracket. And the reason why is for the same reasons nobody in college basketball talks as much about the middling seeds. I'm worried about Clemson a lot if they do what looks like they could do, which is just beat Georgia Tech. I mean, if they lose to Georgia Tech, now we're in like they're not making the tournament territory.
Yeah.
But if they even just beat Georgia Tech, I'm very worried for them. I talked about Virginia Tech having that narrative. If the committee deep dives Virginia Tech, I think they're going to like what they see. If they deep dive Clemson, I don't think they're going to like what they see. They beat Cincinnati. That's looking a little bit better on a neutral court. They beat Georgia, neutral court out of conference, but they haven't really done much of anything. Are those the two best wins Clemson has all season? They literally might be the two best wins Clemson has this entire season. If you're going to the committee with a 1.35 wob and your two best wins all year playing out of the ACC are potentially Cincinnati, like is Cincinnati or Georgia neutral your best thing? If Clemson is on the bubble, I think they're getting left out. It of course depends what the rest of the bubble looks like, but if there's a way to leave the Clemson Tigers out, I think the committee will.
I think the big thing for Clemson staying in is how well they've played away from Little John Coliseum, right? They beat West Virginia and Georgia on a neutral. You mentioned the Cincinnati game. They have five, I think, maybe even six. One, two, three, four, five. Yeah, six wins in league play, including sweeping that trip out to California, which I think has to at least be mentioned as, tougher than it looks on paper. I think that's going to play. The committee always loves their road neutral records. And just the fact that, and we talked about it yesterday, like even at whatever they are, 36, 37, 38, like there's a pretty big cushion right now down to what is currently 46 and 69. Like even like I have Miami, Ohio at 37 right now. I think even if they were to lose tomorrow, I'd probably still keep them in my at-large field, even though their like resume metrics at that point probably wouldn't justify it just because the rest of the bubble is so ugly. So I think those two factors will keep the Tigers in. But then the flip side of that coin is, and you're not supposed to care about the last X number of games anymore. But can you really lose six consecutive games in February into early March and still have the committee be like, yep, that's a tournament team. I know they didn't beat anybody that's an 8 seed or better, but we like what we see. And it's going to get tough if they lose these next two, even if they do turn around and beat Georgia Tech. I think they can get really bubbly in a hurry. And I had them on my, bubble teams who could crash and miss the tournament article a week ago before they lost to Wake Forest and Florida State, and I think they're really playing out the scenario that I feared for them. Anything else on any of these six teams you want to touch on? I don't think we got anything in the chat today.
No, and I'll just mention really quick on the right side, everybody with a less than 1% chance. I do think Wake and Syracuse had a path. I think Virginia Tech and North Carolina shut those down. So I agree with you. Everybody over there really is done at this point. Stanford and Florida State are the only two that I could possibly see making a move, but they would have to really win out for the rest of the regular season. If they do, then it's going to get really interesting entering the ACC tournament, but that's a lot to ask from those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't pull the WOB numbers on Florida State beyond what they currently are. I don't know what they would possibly get to, but they have versus Miami, at Georgia Tech, at Pitt versus SMU. I mean, it's plausible they could win all four, but that probably only gains them about 1.2 wob, somewhere in that range, maybe a little bit more. But I don't think playing well for 7 weeks is going to be enough to get them in after they started 7-11. But they do have a very, very, very faint pulse after all the wins they've picked up lately. That'll wrap us up. We've got Louisville, North Carolina tonight. Also, the big Houston, Kansas game. But until next time, take care and enjoy the hoops.